Okay, so today we're tearing into a comparative report on the 2026 CPR standards in the USA, China, and Taiwan.
Mm.
The data in here on hands-only versus standard protocols is incredibly robust, but the organizational structure is actively fighting the reader.
It's a classic case of great ingredients, messy kitchen. And let's get straight to it. The biggest friction point is the current structure. It fractures the narrative by separating the country-specific profiles from the thematic analysis.
Right, reading this felt like I was being asked to memorize a list of ingredients in Chapter 1, but I wasn't allowed to see the recipe until like Chapter 10.
Exactly.
I'm reading the profile on the USA, then Taiwan, then China. I'm just getting flooded with all these operational details.
Script lengths, compression ratios.
Yeah, all of it. But the legal context and medical necessity sections, I mean, the parts that explain why any of this actually matters, they're buried at the very back.
It puts a massive cognitive load on the audience. You effectively have to hold all the nuances of, say, the Taiwan protocol in your head, wade through 20 pages, read the legal section, and then you have to mentally travel back to make the connection yourself.
It just drains all the impact. The context is completely divorced from the content.
The China section is the perfect example of this.
Oh, yeah.
You're reading about the Chinese consensus and the survival cycle, and, well, frankly, without the context, it's a bit dry.
It is. It just looks like bureaucratic procedure. But then, way later, I find out about the 2021 Civil Code.
Which is the smoking gun. It is the absolute engine driving that consensus because it finally addresses that massive social fear of extortion, the whole ping you effect.
Exactly. The fear that if you help someone, you might get sued. If I don't know that on page 3, I don't get why the protocol is designed the way it is. I don't appreciate the stakes.
So the suggestion here is, I think, pretty clear. The writer needs to restructure the piece. You've got to integrate those thematic elements directly into the country comparisons.
Don't save the why for dessert. Serve it with the main course.
Yes. Or maybe even blow up the geography-based structure entirely.
How so?
What if instead of Chapter 1, USA, Chapter 2, China, what if the writer organized the report by something like barriers to entry?
Oh, that would be so much stronger.
Right? Think about the contrast you could draw. You could have a section on overcoming liability, and in that one section, you put the USA and China side by side.
And you show the USA using federal hammers like the Cardiac Arrest Survival Act to smash those barriers.
And immediately contrast that with China using the Civil Code and social consensus to do the exact same thing.
Then you could move to a section on, say, overcoming skill gaps. And you show the USA trying to fix it with their standardized scripts, while Taiwan uses quality surveillance and that call to chest data.
That way, the reader sees the ecosystem instantly. When you talk about the USA's focus on hands only, you bring in the Cardiac Arrest Survival Act right there, not 20 pages later. It just makes the whole argument punchier.
It changes the whole piece from a travelogue, here's what they do in Taipei, into a real strategic analysis. And speaking of strategy, that brings us to the operational side of things. The report does a good job establishing the medical facts, hands-only versus standard CPR with breaths, but it fails to adequately explore the operational decision-making required by dispatchers.
This is the section where I felt the writer kind of pulled their punches. The text correctly says rescue breaths are superior for drowning victims and kids. Medically, that's not up for debate.
Right. Oxygen is good when you're drowning.
But the report just says dispatchers still use hands-only scripts because, quote, dispatchers cannot reliably assess cause.
And that phrasing, cannot reliably assess cause, it just feels like a cop-out. It's too sterile. It makes it sound like a minor administrative hurdle.
It really does. It glosses over what is actually a profound ethical and statistical gamble. It's a logical gap for an expert reader. If I know breaths are better for drowning and I see the protocol says don't do breaths, my first thought is, well, the protocol is broken.
Because the writer doesn't explain the cost of doing the alternative.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to expand on the triage logic. The writer needs to show the math. They need to explain the calculated risk. It's not that dispatchers can't assess the cause. It's that the time it takes to assess the cause is deadly.
Let's just play this out. I'm a dispatcher.
I pick up the phone, and I have to ask, did the patient drown? How long does that take? 5 seconds? 10 if the caller is panicked?
At least. Sir, did he fall in the water? I don't know, I just found him. Is he wet?
It's raining outside. You're just burning precious seconds.
And that's the math of death. The writer needs to explicitly discuss that gamble. They need to say, we are skipping the drowning question because the delay caused by asking it kills more cardiac patients than the wrong instruction harms drowning victims.
That's the brutal reality of it. You sacrifice the edge cases to save the median cases.
We need to feel that tension in the text. I want to see an analysis of the flowcharts. Does the USA script ask, did they drown before the instruction to push hard and fast? If it doesn't, you have to acknowledge that choice.
And this gets really interesting with Taiwan. The source material mentions they use persuasive communication techniques. But again, it's just treated like a bullet point.
Right.
I want to see the collision. How does that technique handle a caller who is screaming that the victim drowned?
Yes, if the protocol is rigid, there's a trade-off happening right there in real time. The writer says that standard CPR is better for hypoxia, but doesn't explain how a dispatcher in Suzhou is trained to ignore their human instinct in favor of a script.
We need to feel that friction. It turns the report from a medical summary into a real operational critique. It shows these protocols aren't perfect. They're just the best statistical bet we have.
And to get people to actually make that bet, well, you have to get inside their heads. Which brings us to the psychology.
This was the third big issue for me. The analysis of bystander psychology relies way too heavily on negative motivators: fear, hesitation.
All the bad stuff. It overlooks the positive psychological impact of the new simplified scripting.
It's a bit depressing to read as it is, you know? The section on willingness to act is just a laundry list of why people don't act.
Hygiene concerns, fear of disease, fear of breaking ribs, yeah. It paints the bystander as this terrified, reluctant obstacle.
But the data in the report suggests something else is going on. The weakness here is that it misses how the specific words in the new protocols actively manufacture confidence.
It's ignoring the solution. The suggestion is to pivot this entire section to focus on instructional design as a psychological tool. It's not just about removing fear, it's about actively inserting agency.
Let's use the Taiwan example again. They shifted from a very technical instruction, push 100 times a minute, 5 centimeters deep, to push hard and fast.
The current draft treats that like it's just a clarification, like fixing a typo. But it's not. It is a massive reduction in cognitive load.
Cognitive load. Let's unpack that. In an emergency, your brain is running at like 100% CPU usage just trying to process the panic.
Exactly. If I tell you, push 5 centimeters deep, your brain has to visualize a ruler, estimate the depth, and monitor yourself. That uses processing power you just don't have.
But push hard.
Push hard is a raw physical command. It bypasses the analytical brain. The critique should advise the writer to explicitly link simplified phrasing to cognitive load theory.
And there's a line in the USA script sample. I think it's the most important sentence in the whole document, but the writer barely glances at it.
What's the line?
The script opens with, "Listen carefully, I'll tell you what to do."
Oh, that's absolute gold. Listen carefully, I'll tell you what to do.
Think about the alternative. "Sir, please remain calm. I need you to follow my instructions." It's polite, but it's weak.
Listen carefully is a command. It frames the whole interaction immediately.
But is that connection to the bystander effect made in the paper? No. It's treated like throwaway dialogue.
When really that opening phrase is a psychological command to transfer authority.
Yes. The caller stops being a panicked witness and becomes an agent of the dispatcher. I am the brain, you are the hands.
That is a much, much stronger angle. The writer needs to analyze that specific line as a mechanism for overcoming paralysis, not just as part of the instructions.
And that connects right back to the Taiwan data on call to chest times. You reduce the cognitive load, you reduce the time gap. The hands-only approach isn't just medically easier, it's psycholinguistically faster, which saves lives. Ultimately, that's the whole point.
Right.
Which brings us to the conclusion of the report, which I felt was, well, it was fine, but fine isn't good enough for a topic this important.
The conclusion correctly identifies that simplicity saves lives,
but it fails to synthesize the broader implication. How three completely distinct political and cultural systems all converged on the exact same solution.
This is the so what factor. Right now, the ending treats the USA, China, and Taiwan as these parallel lines that just happen to arrive at hands only. Like, oh, isn't that a nice coincidence?
It completely misses the chance to highlight the universal nature of this physiology over liability approach.
Think about how different these places are. China, with historically low CPR training and that massive cultural fear of liability. Taiwan, with super high population density and variable EMS times.
And the USA, a highly litigious society with a totally different medical infrastructure.
Completely different ecosystems. Different laws, cultures, languages, and yet they all solve different problems with the exact same tool.
So the suggestion is to sharpen that final argument. It needs to be about universal physiological truths overriding cultural differences.
That's the mic drop moment.
It is. The writer needs to explicitly contrast the mechanisms of change. Look at the path the U.S. took. Federal law, the Cardiac Arrest Survival Act. They legislated their way to the solution.
Then you look at Taiwan. They used surveillance data. They monitored those call-to-chest times, they saw the delays, and they used that data to drive the change.
And China is using consensus and this concept of the survival cycle to shift public perception.
Law, data, consensus. 3 different vehicles driving to the exact same destination.
And that destination is dictated by biology. The writer should explicitly state that, while the legal paths were different, immunity versus quality control versus civil code, the biological reality of coronary perfusion pressure, or CPP, it forced a global convergence.
Let's just clarify CPP for a second. That's basically keeping the blood pressure in the arteries high enough to feed the heart and brain, right?
Exactly. It's like trying to keep a balloon inflated. Every single time you stop pushing to give a breath, the balloon deflates. The pressure just drops to 0. So it takes several compressions just to get that pressure back up. Biology dictates that continuous pressure is the only thing that matters in those first few minutes. It makes the conclusion so much more robust than just saying simplicity is good.
It says that biology is the ultimate arbiter. It doesn't matter if your political system is a democracy or a public whatever.
If you want to keep blood pressure up, you have to cut the breaths out. That's a powerful ending. It elevates the entire report from a comparative list to a geopolitical comment on medical science.
Okay, this gives the writer a ton to work with. Let's just quickly recap the main actionable takeaways, a clear checklist.
Sounds good? Number 1, structure. Stop siloing your information. Integrate the legal and medical themes directly into the country profiles. Consider organizing by barrier instead of country.
Number 2, depth. Deepen that trade-off section. Don't just say dispatchers can't assess the cause. Explain the operational risk, the math. Admit that we sacrifice the edge cases to save the majority because triage time is too expensive.
Number 3, psychology. Reframe it. Pivot from why people are scared to how the script design specifically commands like listen carefully, reduces cognitive load and hacks the bystander's brain. Link it to cognitive load theory.
And finally, number 4, significance. Rewrite that conclusion. Don't just summarize, synthesize. Highlight the convergence. Show how the USA, China, and Taiwan used law, data, and consensus to arrive at the single physiological truth of coronary perfusion pressure.
There is really excellent material in this draft. The data on the survival cycle and the specifics of that 2021 civil code in China are really high quality. I actually learned things reading this.
Absolutely. The foundation is rock solid. The facts are there. It's just about weaving them into a narrative that respects the reader and really drives home the global implications.
Yeah, exactly. It just needs that narrative glue to make it all stick.
We hope this critique helps you take this report to the next level. We would love to see the next draft, especially to see how you handle the math of death and the listen carefully analysis. So please do submit your work back in again for more feedback. Good luck with the revisions.